Kia ora, I'm Anna White from Southland. We're here with National Party leader Christopher Luxon. Welcome.
Great to be with you, Anna.
So the RMA reform overhaul was released yesterday. Have you had time to go through it, and what are your thoughts?
Look, we haven't digested all 850 pages of it, but what I'd just say to you is, we definitely need RMA reform in order to get things built in this country. We need to make sure we're protecting our environment. But I'm a bit sceptical about this bill, to be brutally honest with you. I don't think fundamentally, at the end of the day, much will change. I've got three concerns initially. It feels very bureaucratic, adding another layer of a committee over the top of regional and district councils. It certainly feels like there's a lot of uncertainty and complexity. There's language in the legislation that will need to be interpreted by the courts, and that will lead to a long time. And it's taking 10 years to get implemented. And so, we have an infrastructure crisis here in New Zealand, and we need to get moving, and we need to get building some stuff. And RMA is a critical way to do it, and so it needs to be much more stripped down, less bureaucratic, and onwards.
That bureaucratic committee that you're talking about is a minimum 6 people. Is that really an added layer of bureaucracy? They're getting rid of hundreds of plans and replacing it with those committees.
Yeah, what I'd just say to you is two things. When you're creating a regional planning committee like it's been proposed, I reckon it could take up to 3 years to actually determine who's actually going to represent councils and regional councils on those committees. Obviously, 2 of those six proposed spaces are for mana whenua, and I can just see that there'll be endless meetings, debate, discussion to actually work out who goes on to those committees. And the second thing I'd just say to you is, look, this is a government that promises action, and think Kiwi Build. We promised to have this government promised to have 100,000 Kiwi Build houses built. Less than 1.4% actually got delivered. It's a government that promised to deliver light rail by 2021, and none of it hasn't even started. I just don't have great confidence they actually will deliver on what they say.
So you'd be happy if there weren't those committees, is that correct?
Well, look, what we'd say is we think the regional planning committee adds a layer of complexity and bureaucracy that's not necessary. I think what we like is the fast track provisions in it. That'll lead to faster consenting, which is a good thing. But my question is, given the challenge that New Zealand has, is why isn't the fast track process the norm rather than the exception? And the other piece is that what we really want to see is actually less interpretation from the courts and from bureaucrats and less discretion. We want people to have massive amounts of certainty as they enter that process. And that ultimately leads you back to saying, how do you get a very simple set of protections around development and also around the environment?
So you could support in the first stage, make those changes in select committee stage, or as national? Look,
I think there's bits we like, but actually at the end of the day, I think when you zoom back out and say replacing one 900-page bill with an 850-page bill, they're probably going to end up in the same space. Good intentions, poor execution, lots of bureaucracy, complexity, uncertainty. So from our point of view, I can't see us supporting it as we go forward at this point. We'll go through it in great detail. Obviously, and in good faith. We want to hear the submissions process as we go through that with the select committees, and then we'll make our decision.
And should National get into power, would you release your own plan, or would you repeal the plan? What would happen?
Yeah, look, we will have our own thoughts on what we think could happen, but what I'd say there is that it's very, we could either look at stripping down this piece of legislation to really the core components that we think are necessary, or alternatively just start from scratch and actually build back a simpler set of environmental protections and also development guidelines.
Speaking about the environment, climate change is going to be and it is a huge issue at the moment. Where do you think New Zealand can make the biggest difference, and how can government help enable that? Yeah,
look, I think the reality is that we are deeply committed to the climate goals for 2050 net carbon zero. We've been supportive of the government's emissions reductions budgets because we think that's the way in which you activate and get towards those goals. We disagree with them on the means by which we deliver those ends. And for us, we really need to rely on our emissions trading scheme, and that means, I think, in our case, also not just relying on 100% planting of pine trees on good sheep and beef land. It's about actually accessing carbon capture technologies that we see, say, for example, in Australia. It's about making sure that we actually are also rewarding, planting of native trees. It's about making sure that we are looking at things like, seagrasses and mangroves around our ocean environment. that can be used for carbon offsetting and sinks as well. So I think there's a lot that we would do about making sure that ETS scheme is actually the thing that will do the heavy lifting to bend our emissions profile. But then the other point is, what you want is saying as a government is what can we genuinely do as government to accelerate the emissions reduction that is unique to government, not left to corporates or others to do in the community. And really it comes back to, there are things governments can do like building out networks. If you think about an EV charging network, that's a good catalyst sort of project, a bit like ultra-fast broadband that government could catalyse or start to spark up. There's big focus for government and a role for government, I think, about really powering up our research and development, particularly in the agricultural space where we have a real emissions challenge going forward. And then I think the last thing is making sure planning reform, for example, you don't spend years and years waiting to do offshore wind, as we've seen in Taranaki, while we wait for resource consenting to happen. If you want to move to we need to move to renewables and embrace it. Let's get the planning reforms and those sorts of things done right. So it's best being really clear, whereas at the moment, the government's getting involved in a whole bunch of things that we're actually, think through the corporate welfare piece. You've got Kiwis paying, contributing to the ETS at the pump. You've got the government taking that money and giving it to wealthy corporates that should be doing their own work to get rid of, to deal with climate change.
With some of the moves that National has come out against, so with the farming emissions plan or the reigniting the oil and gas exploration, do you think National does run the risk of looking climate backwards?
I don't care how we look. I actually want outcomes. And what I am sick of is a government that talks a big game and thinks that it's actually delivering outcomes, and it hasn't delivered a single outcome in this space. So those are two very good examples for me. Government comes out, says, look, love the bumper sticker, love the headline, we're going to knock off the oil and gas sector. What's happened? What's happened is that we've actually now burning 3 times as much coal, imported coal, which can't be good for emissions, and coal is really bad, and we're burning 3 times more than we did in any year in a national government. And why? Because the second and third order consequences of actually how you get outcomes wasn't actually thought through. We need gas for another decade or so as a transitory energy source while we migrate to full renewables. But here's a classic case. Gas is half as emissions damaging as coal. And now we burn 3 times as much coal as we once had in this country, all because we've banned oil and gas to get a headline, but actually haven't delivered any improvement in emissions.
So first year, if National does get in, what would you do for the climate? And in terms of introducing new policy, what would be a couple of...
well, as I said to you, we really want to make sure that we expand the options that are available within the ETS in terms of carbon offsetting. We want to work with industry really closely. There was a very good industry solution that was building and developing. It was quite a big stretch. The government's gone and kiboshed all of that, come in over the top, said we're going to kill off 20% of, 1/5 of sheep and beef farming and livelihoods. We're going to move all that production overseas, and actually global emissions don't get any better. It's just dumb, right? It's just not thought through, and it's a classic case of this government. They conflate announcements and spending announcements and big splashy headlines with actually getting the job done. And whether you go to the climate, whether you look at our economy, whether you look at housing, whether you look at health, whether you look at education, it's the same story.
On truancy, you have referenced the Irish model of penalising parents as a way to get kids to go into school.
I haven't referenced that myself personally. No, but the point's a very fair one, which is I am really intolerant, and it's the most confronting set of statistics I've encountered, is that only 40% of our kids here in New Zealand go to school, and no one seems to care about it, and we're not getting any improvement.
What would the punishment be? What would National do, and what policy would you bring in to get those numbers up?
Well, look, what we're not going to do is tolerate failure and a culture of excuses for why we can't get our kids to school. And there are 3 actors that are really involved in that. The first is government, making sure that the schools have resources, whether it's truancy officers, but instead what we've got is a whole bunch of bureaucrats added at the Ministry of Education, but not on frontline services dealing with attendance issues. The second thing is there are some amazing schools in this country. I saw the best school I've ever seen in my life last week, which was at Mangarua Intermediate School. A decile 1A school, and remembering in decile 1 schools across New Zealand, 77% of our kids are not going to school regularly at the moment. It's incredible, that number. And what they've been able to deliver is really high levels of attendance because they have strong school leadership. They really call parents to be responsible and accountable, and they have really engaged students. And there's a lot of things that they're doing to get that messaging straight with their community to get kids to school. It's not just a school responsibility, it's a parental responsibility, it's a kid's responsibility, it's a government responsibility. And the third aspect is, we've got to call parents to account. It's not good enough that you just can't wake up at 7 o'clock and get your kid to school. You had the kids. It's your responsibility to make sure they've got opportunities that you never had. And the single biggest thing that gets you from bad circumstances to better circumstances is education. I'm a recipient of a state school education, first in my family to go to university, and I was able to go out in the world and be successful because I had a good education from New Zealand. And so,
what sort of punishments would the parents get?
Well, we need to be able to make sure that we can, we would want to involve people like oranga tamariki. We want to be able to have youth police. We want to be able, as a last resort, consider, we're open to all options. If it has to be fines, so be it. But we have to stop accepting a culture of excuses in New Zealand. This is not the. I want to be really clear, because I think New Zealanders need to understand this. If you're in any other developed country on planet Earth and you said that you've got a 40% regular attendance of kids at your schools, that is utterly unacceptable.
Are those figures, are they from the 90% regular attendance rate? Is that the figures you're referring to?
Yeah, so we're talking about regular attendance, and we're talking about 100,000 kids that are what we call chronically absent from school as well, which is incredibly frightening because they are utterly disconnected from school as a result. So those numbers are not good. And it's all very well for the government to say, oh, it's COVID and it's flu, and it's lots of excuses for why it's not happening. But, it turns out we weren't the only country in the world that had COVID, and Ireland and Canada and Australia and the US don't tolerate 40% regular attendance at schools.
Do you support parents taking their kids out for a couple of days either side of holiday?
That's not the core issue here. The core issue is parents not getting their kids to school on a regular daily basis.
So the Ministry of Education is finding that is one of the contributing factors to the higher non-attendance rates.
That everybody's going on big overseas holidays in New Zealand and taking their kids out from school.
Taking holidays.
I would just go see some decile 1 and 2 schools, see how families are dealing with the cost of living crisis. That is not the reason that they're taking kids out of school.
That is some of the middle and upper class schools.
It may well be, but that's a component of it. I try and go to at least 2 schools a week, and 1 or 2 schools a week, and I can tell you, they have kids that are just chronically just disengaged from school. And again, there's lots of reasons for it. So when you talk to the high school principals and schools, and you ask what's going on in high school, why are kids not showing up at school, it's because when they arrive there in year 9, we only have about half our kids essentially at the curriculum levels of reading and writing and maths. And so as a result, the kids don't want to go to school. They disengage from it because they're not doing well in reading and writing and maths, right? And we know 2/3 of our 15-year-olds are failing the most basic maths, reading and writing tests. So, we've got that's a reason for why kids don't go to school. That's why you've got to get back to basics, teach them well through primary school, set them up well for university, for high school, and then hopefully on from there.
Now, on the weekend, you attended the Black Ferns final. Can you tell me about what it was like being in that atmosphere and what National would do to promote women and girls in sport? Yeah,
look, I was a big fan of the Black Ferns and the team. I went to the opening game, I went to the semi-final, I went to the final. I just loved it. I thought the way they played the game with tremendous amounts of joy, passion, great enthusiasm, the way they carried themselves as individuals, as athletes, and the way they were great leaders and role models, I thought was really inspirational, and I thought it was incredibly entertaining, and it was awesome to know that there were people going to those games that had never actually watched a rugby game before, and they were being turned on to the game. So it's a really positive and a really good thing. With respect to women in sport, it's a catalyst moment, but you're seeing it across the world. I've watched women's tennis and men's tennis. I've seen how that sport has developed over the last 10, 15 years. You're seeing it in the UK with respect to, and across Western Europe with respect to soccer and women's soccer. And next year we're going to be hosting the Women's Soccer World Cup. it's going to be a massive event, and it's going to be huge for women in New Zealand, but also around the world. And what's happening here is that, again, you can see that commercially, the Black Ferns are going to be doing well because they're adding a lot to the game of rugby, and so I'm very confident they'll do incredibly well.
So in terms of the government's program at the moment to increase women and girls' participation in sports, marketing and media, is that something that you
fully support? I mean, what I was actually talking to Grant Robertson actually about at the finals was just saying, look, bipartisan, we should be thinking about sport and the role that it plays in improving people's well-being and mental health. We should be thinking about the role that it plays in social cohesion. This is a country that's going to need a lot of immigration over the next 20 years because we have low birth rates and we have an ageing population. So we've got to think about how sport can be used in that way. And I think also in a diplomatic sense in some way as well. So, there's a real opportunity for sport to be used more strategically to actually deliver well-being and social cohesion. And I think that's pretty exciting.
And we should find out soon what their bonus, if they get one, is. Do you expect that to be as the same as the men's sport? What do you think?
Look, don't know. But I mean, the good news is that the CEO of New Zealand Rugby, he gets it and he understands it, and he's already been saying that publicly he's looking into that, and that'll ultimately be a commercial set of terms for the New Zealand Rugby to determine, and that's exactly where it should sit.
All right, I've got your quick questions for you. Just need short answers, yes. If that's all right.
I'll try.
What is your favourite thing to do that isn't politics?
I just love going fishing.
Fishing?
Yeah, hanging out on a boat. I'm not very good at it, but I like doing it. Yeah.
Who is your favourite MP not from National?
I really respect Barbara Edmonds on the Labour side. I think she's really thoughtful and smart and intelligent.
Was there a moment that you decided to become an MP? Do you remember that moment?
No, not really. It's just something that I always thought at some point in my life I'd get to public service, and I thought if I go do other things, which I wanted to do as well, I'd come to this job having something to offer.
What about, how did you celebrate becoming National's leader?
I didn't really. It was just straight into the work, to be honest. If you think about where we were a year ago and where we sit today, we've made tremendous progress, but a lot of it has been a sheer amount of hard work to get going with, and so it was straight to work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you said you enjoy country music?
Yeah, I do, because I lived in America and I got a bit sick of hip-hop after 8 years, and in America there's endless country music stations. Now, it's not the twangy country and western music that we know from the 50s and 60s here in New Zealand, but it's what they call American music, and so when you're doing long road trips, you inevitably end up drifting across to one of those country music stations, and I really love it.
Favourite artist and song?
On the country music space, I mean, I listen to all sorts of music. I love being surrounded by music, and typically every couple of days I send my daughter a song of the day. But in country music, big fan of Tim McGraw.
And she appreciates your song of the day?
What's that?
Is she critical, or does she appreciate your song of the day?
We've always gone to concerts together from when she was young. That's one of the things that we've done together, and discovered different genres of music together. And so, whether it's from the Killers or whether it's right through to country music, we just love all sorts of music.
What about who's the most famous person you've ever met?
I obviously got to meet Barack Obama. I brought him out to New Zealand, and Amanda and I went and stayed the night with him when he was here, and I spent time with him in Sydney as well. And he's someone I respected tremendously because I was living in Chicago when he came through as a presidential candidate. And what I admired about him was he had massive amounts of personal humility and yet huge amounts of determination for his country, for his cause, for the agenda. And so from my perspective, the best leaders I've met, whether it's been Madeleine Albright, or I got to meet Bill Clinton, or business leaders, Bill Gates or Satya Nadella or others, that's the common, and great community leaders, whether they're community, business or political leaders, that's the trick to leadership, is personal humility. It's not about you and your ego, it's really about the cause and the passion of the team.
Who's your hero?
It's probably my dad is someone I really admired and respected a lot, and still do, because he's just a great enthusiast for life. He's always taught me, don't let your circumstances define you, and work incredibly hard.
And what show are you watching at the moment?
What are we watching at the moment? We just started the last season of The Crown, but with my schedule it's a bit difficult to not be able to do the binge watching like I suspect most people can, but Amanda and I try and sneak it together and watch together.
Now, you and Jacinda Ardern seem to get along quite well outside of politics. what do you talk about when you're with her, or what sort of relationship do you have?
Oh, well, I mean, from my past life, I was fortunate, it was important that I actually knew politicians from all political parties, and I think you can have personal relationships without actually, and disagree strongly about policy and direction. What I'm proud about in New Zealand politics, and what I'm keen to ensure, is that we maintain the civility in our politics. It's really easy at the moment, when you look at Western democracies around the world, to go to a very divisive place very quickly, and it's easy politics. But actually the great thing about New Zealand is we have a choice, and yes, we will disagree strongly. I do not agree with I think the country's going in utterly, totally the wrong direction at the moment. I think we've been playing a very negative, small, wet, inward-looking game.
Answers.
Yeah, no, but the point is, I can hold those views, but I can disagree without being disagreeable or personal. And I think all of us as political leaders have a responsibility to make sure that we don't see New Zealand go down the pathway of, say, the US, where I think it's incredibly difficult now to zip up the division that's actually existing in that country. So we get a choice, and I have to model that out.
Well, that's my last question, but thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Appreciate it. Good to be with you.